March 24, 1944. In the dead of night, 76 Allied airmen emerged from a tunnel 30 feet underground, crawling through 336 feet of hand-dug earth toward freedom. What followed would become the greatest escape story of World War II, a tale of ingenuity, courage, and tragedy that would echo through history. Tonight, we're going deep into the frozen ground of Nazi Germany to uncover the true story of the Great Escape. Picture this. You're a highly trained pilot, soaring thousands of feet above Europe, executing precision bombing runs against Hitler's war machine. Then, in an instant, your aircraft is hit. Fire erupts around you. The order comes to bail out. You parachute into enemy territory, captured within hours, and find yourself behind the barbed wire of a prisoner of war camp. Your war isn't over. It's just beginning in a different way. This is the reality that faced thousands of Allied airmen during World War II. But this isn't a story about men who gave up. This is a story about men who refused to accept captivity. Men who turned their prison into a workshop of escape. Men who dug toward freedom with nothing but spoons, ingenuity, and an unbreakable will. Stalag Luft 3 was built specifically to hold Allied airmen. The Germans considered it escape-proof. They were wrong. The camp was located in Sagan, about 100 miles southeast of Berlin, in what was then German Silesia, now part of Poland. The Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, ran these camps, and they generally treated their prisoners according to the Geneva Convention. There was mutual respect between airmen, even enemies. But respect didn't mean freedom, and these men were determined to fly again, even if it meant crawling through the earth itself. The prisoners arrived at Stalag Luft 3 throughout 1942 and 1943. British, American, Canadian, Australian, New Zealand, South African, and other Allied flyers found themselves together in this compound. They came from different countries, different backgrounds, but they shared one thing. They were all officers, all trained in problem solving, all accustomed to taking risks. The Germans had concentrated the cream of Allied military intelligence and determination in one place. Big mistake. Among these men was Roger Bushell, a South African-born British squadron leader. Bushell was a barrister before the war, brilliant, charismatic, and absolutely relentless. He'd been shot down in 1940, and had already escaped from other camps before arriving at Stalag Luft 3. He had even made it to Prague once before being recaptured. The Gestapo had interrogated him brutally. He knew what was at stake. He knew that escape attempts infuriated the Nazi regime, especially the Gestapo. But Bushell had a personal score to settle, and he had a vision that would change everything. In the spring of 1943, Bushell proposed something audacious. Not one tunnel. Not two. 3 simultaneous tunnels. Tom, Dick, and Harry, they called them. The plan was to get 200 men out in a single night. 200 Allied officers flooding into Nazi Germany would tie up enormous resources. Soldiers searching for escapees couldn't fight on the front lines. Every German soldier looking for escaped POWs was one less soldier fighting Allied forces. This wasn't just about individual freedom. This was about contributing to the war effort from behind enemy lines. The scale of what they planned was staggering. The tunnels would need to be 30 feet deep to avoid German seismograph detectors. They would need to extend over 300 feet to reach the cover of the woods beyond the camp perimeter. They would need electric lighting, air pumps, underground workshops, railways to move dirt, and shoring to prevent collapses. And all of this would need to be done in secret, under the noses of guards who were specifically watching for exactly this kind of activity. Bushell assembled a team of specialists. He called it the Escape Committee, and he ran it like a military operation, which it was. There were tunnel engineers, dirt disposal experts, forgers, tailors, map makers, intelligence gatherers, and scroungers who could obtain anything. Everyone had a role. This wasn't a few men digging a hole. This was an underground factory employing hundreds of prisoners in a coordinated operation. Let's talk about the tunnels themselves. 30 feet down meant digging a vertical shaft through sand and clay. The soil at Stalag Luft 3 was bright yellow, a major problem when you're trying to hide tons of excavated dirt in a compound where everything else is gray. The men built trapdoors concealed under stoves, under washroom drains, anywhere the Germans wouldn't look. The entrance to Tom was under a stove in one of the huts. Dick's entrance was in a drain sump in a washroom. Harry started under a stove in Hut 104. Once down the shaft, tunnelers worked in spaces barely wide enough to lie flat. Imagine being 30 feet underground in a space so tight you can't turn around, breathing stale air, knowing that tons of earth above you could collapse at any second. The temperature down there was suffocating. Men worked in their underwear, sweating in the confined darkness, inching forward, scraping away sand with their hands and improvised tools. They needed wood for shoring to prevent collapses. Where do you get wood in a POW camp? From the beds. Prisoners slept on wooden bed frames with slats. Thousands of slats disappeared from beds throughout the camp. Men slept on sagging bed frames, but the tunnels had strong walls. They used over 4,000 bed boards. The tunnels were lined top, bottom, and sides with these boards, creating a wooden tube through the earth. Ventilation was critical. Men couldn't breathe 30 feet underground without air circulation. The prisoners built air pumps from old kit bags, metal containers, and bits of piping. These pumps, operated by hand, pushed fresh air down pipes made from powdered milk cans soldered together. A man would sit in a small chamber pumping constantly while others dug. Without these pumps, the tunnelers would suffocate within minutes. Lighting came from fat lamps, little containers of margarine with wicks, and later from electric lights powered by illegally tapped camp electricity. The tunnelers worked in dim, flickering light, always aware that a cave-in could trap them in pitch darkness forever. Moving dirt was another massive challenge. The bright yellow sand couldn't just be piled up somewhere. It had to be dispersed invisibly. The prisoners came up with an ingenious solution. They made bags from long johns and socks, attached them inside their trouser legs with strings, and walked around the compound casually dispersing the sand through holes in their pockets. These men were called penguins because of the way they waddled as they walked, letting sand trickle out. Meanwhile, other prisoners would dig in vegetable gardens, mixing the yellow sand with gray surface soil. Tons of sand disappeared this way, a handful at a time. The Germans knew escape attempts were happening. They conducted regular searches, brought in dogs, used seismograph equipment to detect digging. The prisoners had to stay one step ahead. They posted lookouts everywhere. A complex system of signals warned of approaching guards. If a German came near a tunnel entrance, men would whistle, cough, or use hand signals. The trap door would slam shut, and within seconds everything would look normal. In September 1943, disaster struck. The Germans discovered Tom. They found the entrance and destroyed the entire tunnel. Months of work, gone in an instant. It was a devastating blow. But Bushel didn't give up. They still had Dick and Harry. They made a strategic decision. Dick would be used for storage, hiding the forged documents, civilian clothes, and supplies they were manufacturing. Harry would be the escape tunnel. All efforts focused on Harry. While the digging continued, other teams worked on equally important tasks. Forgers produced documents that would allow escapees to travel through Germany. German identity cards, travel permits, work passes, all meticulously hand-drawn and forged. The level of detail was extraordinary. They bribed guards to provide real documents to copy. They made inks from crushed vitamin pills and boot polish. They created official stamps from carved soap and wood. Tailors converted uniforms into civilian clothes. Royal Air Force blue uniforms were dyed and recut to look like civilian suits. They made German military uniforms for some men who would pose as foreign workers or guards escorting prisoners. Buttons came from melted phonograph records. Thread came from unraveled socks. Every stitch was done by hand in secret. Mapmakers created detailed escape maps. They traced maps from atlases in the camp library, adding railway lines, roads, and borders. Some maps were printed on silk, so they wouldn't rustle or deteriorate. Others were drawn on thin paper that could be hidden in cigarette packets or concealed in hollow boot heels. The compass makers built compasses from broken phonograph parts, magnetized razor blades, and melted glass. These tiny instruments would guide escapees across hundreds of miles of enemy territory. Food was stockpiled. The prisoners saved portions from their Red Cross parcels for months. Chocolate, biscuits, condensed milk, anything that wouldn't spoil. They made concentrated food bars called fudge, mixing everything together into dense, calorie-rich blocks. Escapees would carry enough food to last several days at minimum. By March 1944, Harry was ready. The tunnel stretched 336 feet from Hut 104 toward the tree line beyond the wire. 200 men had been selected and given numbers determining their escape order. The first 30 were the men with the best chances of making it home, those with German language skills, good forged documents, and solid escape plans. They would go out first while it was still dark and have the most time to get away. The remaining men would follow, but everyone knew that the later you went, the lower your chances. March 24th was chosen. A moonless night, cold but clear. The men prepared in silence, hearts pounding. This was it. Years of planning, months of digging, all coming down to this one night. Some men would taste freedom. Some would be recaptured. Some, though they didn't know it yet, would die. As darkness fell, men began gathering in Hut 104. They wore their civilian disguises, carried their forged papers, their maps, their compasses, their food. The atmosphere was electric with tension and excitement. Roger Bushell, number 1 on the list, would lead the way. He would go out first, into the unknown. The trap door opened. Men descended into the earth. At the far end of the tunnel, diggers broke through to the surface. And then the first problem. The tunnel exit came up short. They had calculated the distance as best they could, but they were 10 feet short of the tree line. The exit was in open ground, visible from the guard towers if anyone looked carefully. There was no choice. They had to go anyway. The escape was on. Men crawled through hairy and near darkness. The tunnel was so tight that some larger men got stuck and had to be pulled through. The rope system that was supposed to speed things along kept breaking. Instead of getting men out every minute, it took 10, 15, even 20 minutes per person. The carefully planned timetable fell apart immediately. And it was cold, bitterly freezing cold. Men emerged from the tunnel into sub-zero temperatures, covered in dirt, disoriented. They had to crawl through the snow to the tree line, then make their way through the forest to the train station in Sagan. Every sound seemed amplified. Every shadow could be a guard. Inside the tunnel, men waited their turn, cramped, anxious, listening to every sound. The air grew stale as more men crowded into Hut 104. Outside, escapees slipped into the night one by one. The first men made it to the station and boarded trains. Bushell and his partner made it out. So did many others. For a few hours, it was working. Then, around midnight, there was an air raid alert. The camp lights went out. Everything stopped. Men in the tunnel couldn't move in complete darkness. Precious time ticked away. When the lights came back on, the escape resumed, but the delay was costly. As dawn approached, tension mounted. They needed to seal the tunnel and return to normal before morning roll call. But men were still going through, desperate for their chance at freedom. 76 men had escaped when, at 4:55 in the morning, a German guard spotted someone emerging from the tunnel exit. The alarm sounded. Guards rushed to Hut 104. The escape was over. Men still in the tunnel scrambled back. Those already outside scattered into the forest. The greatest mass escape of World War II had succeeded in getting 76 men out. But now came the manhunt. Hitler was furious, absolutely enraged. He saw the escape as a personal insult, a breach of trust between airmen, a mass breakout that embarrassed the Luftwaffe and the entire Reich. He initially ordered all recaptured prisoners to be shot, all of them. His staff talked him down, pointing out that executing POWs would be a clear war crime and might lead to retaliation against German prisoners. Hitler reduced the number. 50 escapees would be shot as an example. The Gestapo, not the Luftwaffe, took control of the manhunt. They set up roadblocks, checked trains, searched forests. Germany was on high alert. Thousands of soldiers, police, and Gestapo agents hunted for the escapees. For men who had hoped to contribute to the war effort by tying up German resources, they succeeded beyond measure. The manhunt involved millions of man-hours. Of the 76 who escaped, only 3 made it to freedom. 3. 2 Norwegians, Per Bergsland and Jens Muller, made it to Sweden. They traveled by train to the Baltic coast, then found a Swedish ship to stow away on. A Dutchman, Bram van der Stock, made it through Germany to the Netherlands and then to Spain and eventually back to England. He traveled by train most of the way, bluffing his way through checkpoints with forged papers and sheer nerve. 73 men were recaptured, and of those, 50 were murdered. Not killed in combat, not shot while trying to escape, murdered in cold blood on Hitler's orders. The Gestapo picked them up, drove them to remote locations, and shot them. They told the camp it was shot while trying to escape, but everyone knew the truth. It was murder. The list of the murdered 50 reads like a roll call of heroes. Roger Bushell, the mastermind, shot near Saarbrücken. Squadron Leader James Cadenac, Flight Lieutenant Harold Milford, Flight Lieutenant Edgar Humphreys, on and on. 50 names. 50 men who fought for freedom and paid with their lives. When the other prisoners at Stalag Luft 3 learned the truth, the camp went into mourning. The Germans had violated every code, every understanding between soldiers. The Luftwaffe officers running the camp were ashamed. Some had warned that this escape would end badly, but even they were shocked by the murders. After the war, the hunt for those responsible became a priority. A special RAF investigation team tracked down the Gestapo agents and SS officers who had carried out the murders. Many were brought to trial. Some were executed. Some were imprisoned. Justice, incomplete as it always is, was served. But let's step back from the tragedy and remember what these men accomplished. They built 3 tunnels under impossible conditions. They forged documents that fooled German officials. They created an entire underground organization that operated for a year under constant surveillance. They got 76 men out of a camp designed to be escape-proof. 3 made it home and continued fighting. The others tied up massive German resources during a critical phase of the war, and they proved something essential. They proved that the human spirit cannot be caged, that ingenuity and determination can overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles, that even in captivity, even behind wire and guard towers, free men will find a way to resist. The Great Escape became legendary. Books were written, most famously Paul Brickhill's The Great Escape, written by a man who was there. Movies immortalized the story, though Hollywood took liberties with the facts. But the core truth remains. Real men did this. They really dug those tunnels. They really forged those documents. They really crawled through the earth toward freedom. Think about the engineering alone. These men calculated angles, distances, and structural loads without computers or sophisticated tools. They built air pumping systems from scraps. They created railways using salvaged materials to move dirt. They lit their workspace with improvised lamps. Every problem was met with innovation. Every obstacle was overcome. The psychological strength required is even more impressive. Imagine the claustrophobia of working in a tunnel so narrow you can barely move. Imagine the fear of cave-ins, of being buried alive. Imagine keeping secrets for months, never knowing if today would be the day you were discovered. And imagine, after all that work, being recaptured and facing execution. These weren't professional criminals or escape artists. They were pilots, navigators, bombardiers. They were skilled at flying aircraft, not digging tunnels. But they learned. They adapted. They became experts in fields completely outside their training because the situation demanded it. The Great Escape also highlights the international nature of the Allied effort. The escape committee included British, American, Canadian, Australian, New Zealand, South African, Polish, Czech, and other nationalities. Language barriers were overcome. Cultural differences were set aside. They worked as one team toward one goal. In that tunnel, nationality didn't matter. Only freedom mattered. Let's talk about some of the individuals involved beyond Bushell. Wally Floody, a Canadian mining engineer before the war, became one of the chief tunnel engineers. He understood soil mechanics, shoring, and ventilation. His expertise was invaluable. Ironically, he was transferred to another camp before the escape, which probably saved his life. Des Plunkett and Johnny Bull were forgery experts. They created documents so convincing that some escapees passed multiple checkpoints. The detail work was painstaking. Every stamp, every signature, every official marking had to be perfect. Tommy Guest was one of the tailors. He converted RAF uniforms into convincing civilian clothes using primitive dyes and endless hand stitching. Some of his creations allowed men to travel on trains surrounded by German soldiers without raising suspicion. Tim Whalen ran the map-making operation. He and his team produced maps that were works of art, accurate enough to navigate by, small enough to hide, detailed enough to show railway connections and border crossings. Al Haik ran the compass production. His team magnetized razor blades and balanced them on pivot points to create working compasses. These tiny instruments were crucial for escapees traveling cross-country. And then there were the penguins, the men who dispersed the dirt. They risked detection every single day, walking casually around the compound with bags of sand inside their trousers, slowly releasing it. Boring work. Dangerous work. Essential work. The trapdoor builders created concealed entrances so perfect that German guards could stand on them without knowing. These entrances had to support weight, open silently, and be completely invisible when closed. The craftsmanship was remarkable. The security team ran the lookout system. They tracked guard movements, identified patterns, and warned of approaching danger. They created codes and signals that allowed hundreds of men to operate in plain sight without detection. Every role mattered. Every person contributed. The Great Escape worked because it was a team effort on an unprecedented scale. No one person could have done this. It required the combined skills, courage, and determination of hundreds of men working together. Now let's address something important. Some people ask whether it was worth it. 50 men died. Only 3 made it home. Was the cost too high? It's a legitimate question, and there's no easy answer. The men who planned and executed the escape knew the risks. They knew that recapture was likely. They knew that the Gestapo was brutal. They went anyway. Does that make it worth it? That's for each of us to decide. But I think we have to respect their choice. They chose resistance over compliance. They chose action over passivity. They chose to fight in the only way available to them. And the strategic impact was real. The manhunt diverted enormous resources. Intelligence gained from interrogations of recaptured men provided valuable information. The morale boost for Allied forces hearing about the escape was significant. And the story itself became a symbol of resistance that inspired others. After the war, Stalag Luft III became part of Poland. The camp was eventually torn down, but a museum now stands near the site. The tunnels have collapsed, but markers show where they once ran. Visitors can see reconstructions and learn the story. The murdered 50 are commemorated. Their sacrifice is remembered. For the 3 who made it home, life went on, but the escape never left them. They carried it with them always. Bram van der Stok returned to the RAF and continued flying. After the war, he became a physician. Per Bergsland and Jens Muller rejoined their units and fought until the war ended. All 3 lived long lives, but they never forgot the 73 who didn't make it. The survivors from the camp who weren't part of the escape carried the story forward. Paul Brickhill wrote the definitive account. Others gave interviews, attended reunions, and ensured that the world knew what happened. The story couldn't be buried, couldn't be forgotten. The Great Escape teaches us lessons that transcend the specific historical moment. It teaches us about the power of planning and organization. It teaches us about the importance of every person's contribution to a larger goal. It teaches us about courage in the face of overwhelming odds. It teaches us that freedom is worth fighting for, even when the fight seems hopeless. It also teaches us about the darkness humans are capable of. The murder of 50 unarmed prisoners was a war crime, a stain on those who ordered and carried it out. It reminds us that rules matter, that laws of war exist for a reason, and that violating them has consequences. For modern audiences, especially Americans interested in military history, The Great Escape connects to broader themes in World War II. It shows the air war's human cost. Every bomber crew shot down represented highly trained men, often in their early 20s, suddenly thrust into captivity. It shows the international nature of the Allied coalition. Men from across the English-speaking world and occupied Europe fought together, and it shows that the war wasn't just fought on battlefields. It was fought in POW camps, in occupied cities, in resistance movements across Europe. The American contribution to Stalag Luft III was significant. Though most of the escapees were Commonwealth airmen, Americans were involved in the planning and execution. Some Americans were among those who escaped, though most were transferred before the breakout. American pilots filled the camp in increasing numbers as the war went on, and they learned from the British and Commonwealth prisoners who had been there longer. The story also connects to the broader history of POW escapes. Americans remember the Doolittle Raiders who escaped China after their raid on Tokyo. They remember stories of escapes from Japanese camps in the Pacific. The Great Escape stands alongside these as examples of military personnel refusing to give up even in captivity. As we come to the end of this story, let's remember the names. Roger Bushell, the leader. Wally Floody, the engineer. Des Plunkett and Johnny Bull, the forgers. Tommy Guest, the tailor. Tim Whalen, the map maker. Al Hake, the compass maker. And the 50 who were murdered, James Cadenac, Harold Milford, Edgar Humphreys, and 47 others whose names deserve to be spoken and remembered. Let's remember the 3 who made it home. Per Bergsland, Jens Muller, and Bram van der Stok, who proved it could be done. Let's remember the 23 who were recaptured and returned to the camp, who lived with survivors' guilt and the memory of lost friends. And let's remember the hundreds who contributed without escaping themselves, who dug, who forged, who dispersed dirt, who stood lookout, who risked punishment to help others reach for freedom. The Great Escape happened more than 80 years ago, but its lessons remain relevant. It reminds us that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when united by purpose. It reminds us that planning and preparation can overcome enormous obstacles. It reminds us that freedom is precious and worth sacrificing for. And it reminds us that even in humanity's darkest hours, courage and ingenuity can shine through. So the next time you face a seemingly impossible challenge, remember 76 men who crawled through 336 feet of hand-dug tunnel toward freedom. Remember that they did it with improvised tools, scrounged materials, and sheer determination. Remember that 3 made it all the way home. And remember that the human spirit, when tested, can achieve the impossible. This is the story of the Great Escape. A story of courage, ingenuity, tragedy, and triumph. A story that deserves to be told, remembered, and honored. Thank you for listening.